Assalamualaikum. Welcome to our presentation. My name is Muhammad Luqman Ashraf, student ID 2024-776-135. Today I will be introducing the overall topic of privatization and the private finance initiative, or PFI. The provision of public services and infrastructure often requires significant capital investment and operational expertise. Governments worldwide have increasingly turned to the private sector to help meet these needs, leading to the development of different models for public-private collaboration. Two key concepts in this space are privatization and the private finance initiative, PFI. Okay, now why do governments involve the private sector? Governments around the world often face challenges such as budget limitations, rising demand for services, or pressure to improve efficiency. To overcome these issues, governments sometimes involve the private sector in delivering public services or infrastructure. There are many approaches to doing this, but two common methods are privatization and PFI. Today I will introduce the first method, which is privatization. The next presenters will explain PFI and compare both approaches. Privatization is when the government transfers ownership to the public assets or services to the private sector. This means the private company now owns, controls, and manages the service independently. Privatization is often used when the government believes that private companies can operate more efficiently or effectively than the public sector. The key point to remember is that privatization involves a complete change of ownership from public. There are several reasons why governments choose privatization. Firstly, it allows the government to reduce financial burdens because private companies take over the cost of operating and maintaining the services. Secondly, privatization can improve efficiency because private companies have stronger initiatives to minimize costs and maximize performance. Third, it encourages competition, which often leads to better service quality. Finally, it allows governments to focus more on essential services such as healthcare, education, or public safety. To make this clearer, here are a few examples. Many countries have privatized telecommunications companies, for example, British Telecom in UK. Airlines have also been privatized, such as Malaysia Airlines, in certain periods. Other common areas include electricity generation, water supply, and public transport. These examples show how privatization is applied in many sectors where the private sector can deliver services efficiently.
Okay, now I want to talk about a private finance initiative. A private finance initiative is a method used by governments to fund public projects such as hospitals, schools, roads, and infrastructures using private sector investment rather than paying for everything upfront with public money. Okay, next I want to talk about how private finance initiative works. A private company designs, finance, builds, and often operates a public assets. Second is the government pays the company back over a long-term contract, typically in 25 to 30 years. The third is a payment usually covers in construction costs, maintenance and operation, financing costs, and profit for the private company. Why use a private finance initiative? Firstly is to spread the overtime costs, which is PFI allow government to get a major projects built without a large upfront spending. The cost is spread over 20 to 30 years, similar to a mortgage. Second is access to private sector expertise, which is a private firm often have a more experience in constructions, project management, and maintenance. This can lead to a faster completion, higher quality buildings, and better long-term maintenance of contracts. The third is transfer of risks, which is key risks can be transferred to the private sector, such as construction delays, cost overruns, and maintenance failure. If something wrong happen, to company absorb the cost. The lastly is government can focus on public service, which is PFI lets the government focus on running service, which is teaching or healthcare, while the private company handles the infrastructures and maintenance. The benefits of private finance initiative. PFIs allow the public sector to partner with private companies for the delivery of infrastructures and services. This collaboration brings a financial, operation, and managerial advantage. The main benefits include: first, to improve efficiency and innovation by involving private companies. PFIs introduce a commercial incentive that push contractors to work efficiently and deliver high quality results. Number two, access to private capital. PFIs allow government to use private sector funds that with major public projects. For the example, it can reduce pressure on public budgets, especially during times of limited government revenue. Number three, we have a value for money. PFIs typically include a payment mechanism based on performance. This means the public sector only pays when the private partner meets agreed standards, such as if the building or service does not meet the quality requirements, the payment may be reduced. As a result, PFIs can deliver a better long-term value compared to traditional procurement where contractors are paid upfront regardless of performance. Number four, we have a budget predictability. The PFIs operate under long-term contracts, often 20 to 30 years. For the example, a predictable annual payments improve financial stability for public authorities, and it helps avoid unexpected cost overruns. So, this long-term certainty supports more disciplined financial management within the public sector.
Now, let's look at the project goal for both privatization and the private financing initiative or PFI. For privatization, the main goal is to completely transfer ownership, control, and operation of a public asset or service to the private sector. This means the private company become fully responsible for funding, managing, and delivering to the service on its own. The government step back and play only a regulatory role, make sure service meets standard, but not directly operating them. On the other hand, the goal of PFI is different. Here, the private sector is brought in mainly to provide financing, expertise, and efficient project delivery. The private partner design, build, finance, and may operate the facility, but the government still own the asset. This allows the government to get high quality infrastructure while ensuring the continuous to serve public needs over the long term. In summary, the goal of privatization is full private ownership, while the goal of PFI is private delivery with government ownership and oversight. For privatization, the advantages are reduced government burns, higher efficiency, and more competition. The disadvantages include loss of government control, risk of monopoly, and possible public dissatisfaction. For the PFI, the advantages are not longer upfront government spending, faster project delivery, better maintenance, and good risk sharing. The disadvantage are high long-term payment, complex contract and less flexibility to the change service requirement.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Muhammad Verifadli Birutansha. My metric number is 2024991859. And my part is I will tell comparison between privatization and private finance initiative. Okay, the first one is the definition. The definition of privatization is the transfer of ownership and control of public assets or services to the private sector, and the PFI definition is the private sector finance builds and operates public infrastructure, but ownership stays with government. The ownership of the privatization is the private sector owns the asset, but the PFI is government owns, private sector only operates and maintains. The funding of privatization is the fully by private investors, but the PFI is private sector pays upfront, government repays over long term 20 to 30 years. And the risk allocation for privatization is the most risk transfers to private sector, but the PFI is construction and operational risk on private sector, demand or usage risk often on government. For the government role, for the privatization is a limited offer, limited after transfer, regulatory only, but the PFI is continuous oversight, long-term payment and obligations. And for the aspect of participants, privatization, government, private, investor and regulations, but for the PFI is government plus private consortium, contractor financier, facility manager and banks.
On this slide, I'm comparing privatization and the private finance initiative using three key points. The first one is ownership, the second one is control, and the third one is funding. First, ownership in privatization, the government sells an asset to the private sector completely. This means the private party actually owns it, but in PFI, ownership usually stays with the private company only during the contract. After that, the asset is returned to the government, so PFI is temporary while privatization is permanent. Next, control and management. Under privatization, the private company gains long-term or even permanent control over how the asset is run. But under PFI, even though the private sector manages the project, the government still sets standards and monitors performance. Finally, funding privatization brings in immediate cash from the sale of government asset. Now, for the second slide, I'll explain risk allocation purpose and some real examples. Starting with risk allocation, in privatization, the private sector takes on almost all the risk: business risk, operational risk, and market risk. But with PFI, risks are shared. The private partner handles construction and operation risk, while the government usually keeps regulatory or demand risk. Next, the purpose privatization mainly aims to reduce government involvement and increase efficiency by letting competition drive improvement. On the other hand, PFI is used when the government needs infrastructure quickly but doesn't have enough budget to pay upfront, so they spread the cost over many years. And lastly, examples privatization includes selling assets like national airlines, water utilities, or telecom companies.
Today, we compare two major approaches government used to collaborate with private sector: privatization and the private financial initiative (PFI). Privatization involves transferring full ownership and control of public assets to the private sector. This method reduces the government financial burden, increase efficiency, and promote innovation. However, the government lose control and there is a risk of monopolies and higher price. Meanwhile, PFI allow the private sector to design, finance, build, and sometimes operate public facilities such as hospital, university, and highway. Ownership remain the government, but payment are spread over 20 to 30 years. PFI bring private expensive and shift construction risk to the private partner. Although long-term contract can be costly and inflexibility. In short, privatization gives full responsibility to the private sector, while PFI focus on partnership where the private sector finance and manage, but the government still own the asset. The choice between both model depend on project goal, how much control the government want to maintain and how risk should be shared. That's all from us. Thank you.